Does Jesus want us to be honoring the Lord's Day, the Sabbath? Well, let's look at what set of commands Jesus tells us to guard. In Matthew 19, it reads, "But if you wish to enter into life, guard the commands," he said to him, which, and Jesus said, "You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, respect your father and your mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself." When Jesus spoke of these commands to the young man asking the question, the young man knew exactly what commands Jesus was referring to. In Matthew 19:20, the young man replied to Jesus, saying, "All these I have watched over from my youth. What do I still lack?" Since the young man was already familiar with these set of commands, where else are these set of commands mentioned in the Bible that the young man would already have known them from? The 10 Commandments. In Exodus 20, it reads, "Respect your father and your mother, so that your days are prolonged upon soil which your Lord your God is giving you. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, you do not bear false witness against your neighbor." The 10 Commandments are set apart on stone and written by God's own hand. In Exodus 31, it reads, "And when he had ended speaking with him on Mount Sinai, he gave Moses 2 tablets of the witness, tablets of stone, written with the finger of God." The Bible also tells us God is our rock. In 2 Samuel, it reads, "For who is God besides the Lord, and who is a rock besides our God?" And God wrote his commands on rock. I believe this was to emphasize their permanence for all mankind. In Ecclesiastes, it reads, "Let us hear the conclusion of the entire matter. Fear God and guard his commands, for this applies to all mankind." So since Jesus tells us to guard the commands, let's see what the set of commands says about the Sabbath. In Exodus 20, it reads, "Remember the Sabbath day, to set it apart. 6 days you labor and shall do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. You do not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart." The command starts with "remember the Sabbath" and to set it apart. God then goes on to clearly tell us we are to rest on his specific day and to also not make others work. God also references creation week and how he rested on the 7th day and blessed the day and set it apart. In creation week in the book of Genesis, it reads, "And in the 7th day God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the 7th day and set it apart, because on it he rested from all his work which God in creating had made." In the book of Hebrews in the New Testament, it reads, "So there remains a Sabbath keeping for the people of God, for the one having entered into his rest has himself also rested from his works, as God rested from his own. Let us therefore do our utmost to enter into that rest, lest anyone fall after the same example of disobedience." Some people think a specific day of rest isn't going to matter to the Lord, but God tells us it does. Sin is disobedience to God. People seem to forget that the first human sin was as simple as the eating of a fruit from a tree, but it was a tree that God said not to eat from. So how do we know what day is the 7th-day Sabbath, the Lord's day of rest? Well, we can look at the Orthodox Jews who have faithfully kept God's 7th-day rest for thousands of years. But here is also a list of names for our Saturday in many languages, which refer to the day as Sabbath. Some people refer to the following verses to claim that we no longer have to follow all of God's 10 commandments. Let's go through them. In Matthew 22, it reads, "Teacher, which is the great command in the Torah?" And Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your being and with all your mind. This is the first and great command. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commands hang all the Torah and the prophets." Note, the Protestant Old Testament is the same as the Hebrew Scriptures. It consists of 3 collections of writings, a threefold division. The collection of writings are the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. In the verse it says, "On these 2 commands hang all the Torah and the prophets." This verse is saying that loving God and loving your neighbor is the hanger in which the Torah and the prophets are hanging upon. Or in other words, the 2 commands are a summarization of the Torah and the prophets. The Torah and the prophets give us instructions and show us how to love God and how to love our neighbor. In Galatians 5:14 it reads, "For the entire Torah is completed in one word, in this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Another verse that some claim does away with the Lord's Day is Colossians 2:16. In Colossians 2:16 through 17 it reads, "Let no one therefore judge you in eating or in drinking or in respects of a festival or a new moon or Sabbaths, which are a shadow of what is to come, but the body of the Messiah." But in this verse, it is God's people who are being talked to, who do keep God's festival days and Sabbaths. Colossians 2:16 is saying to God's people that they are not to let anyone judge them for keeping God's commands, including God's festivals, new moons, and Sabbaths, because they are a shadow of what is to come. God warns us against keeping man's traditions over God's commands. In Mark 7 it reads, "And in vain do they worship me, teaching as teachings the commands of men, forsaking the command of God. You hold fast the tradition of men." And he said to them, "Well, do you set aside the command of God in order to guard your tradition?" And God's Sabbaths were also created to be a sign between God and his people. In Ezekiel 20 it reads, "And I also gave them my Sabbaths, to be a sign between them and me, to know that I am the Lord who sets them apart." Another verse some try and claim does away with God's day of rest is Mark 2:27. It reads, "And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath." Yes, the Sabbath was made for man. God made it, blessed it, and set it apart for us in creation week. God himself rested on his day. Another verse some will say does away with the Lord's Day is Matthew 12:8. It reads, "For the Son of Man is master of the Sabbath." Matthew 12:8's purpose is Jesus making known he is master over the Sabbath, declaring authority on teaching of how we should be honoring the Sabbath. Jesus is declaring himself Lord. The verse comes from a chapter where Jesus was correcting the Pharisees. The Pharisees claimed that Jesus was breaking the Sabbath by healing people on the Sabbath and allowing his taught ones to eat from the field on the Sabbath. Jesus was correcting and teaching them that it is right to do good on the Sabbath. The day was made for us, therefore it is lawful to do good. Men had been adding extra laws that were not God's laws. The laws made by man were going against the purpose of the Sabbath. The Sabbath is to be a blessing. In Matthew 12 it reads, "And see, there was a man having a withered hand, and they asked him, saying, Is it right to heal on the Sabbath? So as to accuse him. And he said to them, What man is there among you who has one sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, shall not take a hold of it and lift it out? How much more worth is a man than a sheep? So it is right to do good on the Sabbath." Another verse in Matthew 12 reads, "And if you had known what this means, I desire compassion and not offering, you would not have condemned the blameless, for the Son of Man is master of the Sabbath." In the Old Testament, in Hosea 6, it reads, "For I delight in loving commitment and not slaughtering, and in the knowledge of God more than ascending offerings." Another verse from the Old Testament, in Proverbs 21, it reads, "To do righteousness and right ruling is more acceptable to the Lord than a slaughtering." Jesus is master over the Sabbath. Wouldn't it be hypocritical of him if he taught against honoring the day? And we know Jesus did not think well of hypocrites. In Matthew 23, it reads, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites." Some people will bring up that Jesus was accused of breaking the Sabbath. To that I say, do you believe the accusers, who were lying, hypocritical Pharisees, who were adding extra laws that were not God's laws? Jesus got accused of many things. He was also called a gluttonous man and a drunkard. He even was accused of blasphemy. If you claim to follow Jesus, I would hope you don't believe man's accusations over God and his teachings. Here's some extra verses on God's commands and the Sabbath. Revelation 14:12. Here is the endurance of the set-apart ones. Here are those guarding the commands of God and the belief of Jesus. Matthew 24:20. And pray that your flight does not take place in winter or on the Sabbath. Luke 4:16. And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and according to his practice, he went into the congregation on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. Acts 18:4. And he was reasoning in the congregation every Sabbath, and won over both Jews and Greeks. John 14:15. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. Psalms 112:1. Praise the Lord. Blessed is the man who fears the Lord, who delights greatly in his commandments. 1 Corinthians 7:19. The circumcision is not, and the uncircumcision is not, but the guarding of the commands of God does matter. Proverbs 19:16. He who guards the command guards his life. He who despises his ways dies. Proverbs 7:2-3. Guard my commands and live, and my Torah as the apple of your eye. Bind them on your fingers, write them on the tablet of your heart. Deuteronomy 5:12. Guard the Sabbath day, to set it apart as the Lord your God commanded you. Revelation 12:17. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to fight the remnant of her seed, those guarding the commands of God and possessing the witness of Jesus Messiah. Daniel 7:25. And it speaks words against the Most High, and it wears out the set-apart ones of the Most High, and it attends to change appointed times and law, and they are given into its hand for a time and half a time. Psalms 95:11. As I swore in my wrath, if they enter into my rest. Hebrews 3 and Hebrews 4. And to whom did he swear that they would not enter into his rest, but to those who did not obey? So we see that they were unable to enter because of unbelief. Therefore, since a promise remains of entering into his rest, let us fear lest any of you seem to have come short of it. For indeed the good news was brought to us as well as to them, but the word which they heard did not profit them, not having been mixed with belief in those who heard it. For we who have believed do enter into that rest, as he has said, As I swore in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest. And yet his works have come into being from the foundation of the world. For somewhere he has said thus about the seventh day, and God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And in this again, if they shall enter into my rest. Since then it remains for some to enter into it, and those who formerly received the good news did not enter in because of disobedience. He again defines a certain day, today, saying, through David so much later, as it has been said, Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Jesus had given them rest, he would not have spoken of another day after that. So there remains a Sabbath keeping for the people of God. For the one having entered into his rest has himself also rested from his works, as God rested from his own. Let us therefore do our utmost to enter into that rest, lest anyone fall after the same example of disobedience. Isaiah 58:12-14. And those from among you shall build the old waste places. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations, and you would be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the streets to dwell in. If you do turn back your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my set-apart day, and shall call the Sabbath a delight, the set-apart day of the Lord esteemed, and shall esteem it, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasures, nor speaking your own words, then you shall delight yourself in the Lord, and I shall cause you to ride on the heights of the earth, and feed you with the inheritance of Jacob your father. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken.